January 13th, 2026, and my name is Thais Armstrong. I'm interested in facilitating some story keeping, and I'm fortunate to be joined by my neighbor, Jan Johnson. So, Jan, will you introduce yourself?
Yes. I am Jan Jones, formerly Jan Dunlap, and my family bought a piece of property on Scott Road on Alice Bay in the summer of 1960. We camped there the first 2 summers, but the summer of 1962, when I was 8 years old, we went to the property in early June and had 2.5 months while my parents built a cabin. We lived in a tent, and my father was a history professor, not a builder, and we did not have electricity at the property. So it was an enormous undertaking for someone who was not skilled at building. And as a result, although I was not mistreated, I was neglected. And being 8, one needs something to do as 8 and someone to talk to, and my parents simply could not devote any time to me. So I ended up inserting myself into the lives of the people who then lived at either end of Scott Road. At the beginning of Scott Road was the Squire's dairy farm, and I initially spent a great deal of time there because they allowed me to come watch the cows get milked. And they allowed me to walk with the cows back across the road to the field where the cows would be milked. And then if I was there in the afternoon, I would walk both ways with the cows. When the cows crossed Samish Island Road, going up to the barn, it took about 15 minutes. A traffic light was installed to give cars warning that they had to slow down and stop. The Squire's farm had about 100 cows, so it took a while. And Danny Squires, the son of one of the farmers, knew the gentler cows, and he would lift me up and let me ride the lead cow going to and from the barn, which was great fun for me. He walked alongside me. But as the summer went on, I ended up spending more and more time, in fact, every day, with Mary and Ethan Scott, who lived at the extreme east end of Scott Road, on what was known then as Scott Point. They had cats. They had, in fact, newborn kittens when I first met Mary, and she told me I could come any time to play with the kittens on the front porch, which I took as an invitation to spend every day there, and she never once turned me away. In fact, Mary spent a great deal of time talking to me. It's hard for me to imagine this, but I think I must have fulfilled a need in her life like she was fulfilling a need in mine. Mary told me over the course of that summer stories from her life that were astonishing to me. Her mother was a Samish Indian. Her mother was born in the Samish Ilahi, or longhouse, that used to run along the shoreline of Alice Bay. Her mother's name was Jenny Tahati. Mary told me that Mary's father, who married Jenny Tahati, was a British sailor who deserted when his ship pulled into Victoria Harbour, which was a British port then. Canada was not yet an independent country. And he fell in love with Jenny Tahati on shore leave and never went back to the Royal Navy. They canoed in the dark from Victoria to Samish Island, and eventually he homesteaded in what is now Bow. In fact, he named it Bow after the neighborhood he was from in London. Mary told me these stories while I petted the kittens, and she told me stories that were tragic. Her mother, being a Samish Indian, had survived smallpox. Her mother had smallpox. Her grandmother had smallpox and survived it. But I had photographs. She showed me photographs of her grandmother, and her grandmother was left blind in one eye and completely disfigured by smallpox. The stories she told me about what happened to the Samish Indians were so sad, and the catastrophe of their collision with Western civilization was overwhelming to me when I was a little girl. And she told me not to be filled with hatred, because she said that won't help anybody. She said what you need to do is to remember. Because if we forget about what people went through, it's the final indignity. And she taught me that it was very important to know about the past. She, in fact, designated me by the end of the summer to be her official rememberer. She talked about how everyone had gifts, and that when we discovered our gift, she wouldn't have used this term, we were fully realized human beings. She had a gift. She was a healer, and she could take a wounded animal and make that animal whole, and she did it over and over and over again. And to a certain extent, she took a wounded little girl and made her whole. This is a little harsh for my parents. I don't mean to say that they wounded me, but Mary told me my gift was remembering. And she said she was pleased, she said, because it had been a worry that she didn't have a rememberer. So now I'm a 72-year-old, older than Mary was when I showed up at her door to spend the summer petting her kittens. And I'm very conscious of the fact that I promised her I would remember her and her stories. And so it is important to me to share them.